Good afternoon. You're listening to Radio Free New York here on WYSL 1040 AM and 92.1 and 95.5 FM. I am Kevin the Libertarian, guest hosting for Andrew Hollister today. He unfortunately was not able to make it, so I am doing a pre-recorded episode. For those of you listening at home out on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, unfortunately, I will not be able to answer your calls or respond to any of your comments, but I will check those out later to respond to them if you have any questions or comments about what I'm doing here today. But again, I'm Kevin Wilson. I'm guest hosting for Andrew Hollister here on Radio Free New York. Thanks so much for joining me. I have a few different topics coming up this afternoon that I hope are of interest to you. And I'm just going to dive right into it. There's a few things going on locally that I think are of interest to the libertarian movement and I think are worth talking about. And it's one of those things where a lot of times we end up getting consumed by national politics. And it's a unifying force in a way for a radio broadcast like this because you can easily find information on those types of topics. You can look on cable news networks, all the local stations are talking about it, but a lot of governance happens at the local level. A lot of laws that affect your day-to-day life happen at a local level. And if you've heard any of the times that I've subbed in for Andrew before, you'll know that that's kind of one of my big things is that you need to pay attention to local politics because it matters. And one of the bills that has come up recently in Monroe County and may come up soon in one of your local county legislatures as well is a bill regarding the police and, first responders generally. And that bill was something proposed by two Republican county legislators, Carla Boyce and Kara Halstead. And this bill was to crack down on the harassment of first responders. And this was considered a matter of urgency for the Monroe County Legislature, which means that it doesn't go through the normal committee vetting process. It means that the bill is introduced, and then it gets a vote at the next county ledge meeting. And so this bill was introduced at the October county ledge meeting and in Monroe County and was voted on and passed by a partisan majority at the November 2019 meeting. And I want to read some parts of the statement that came with the introduction of the bill from the Monroe County majority's office last month. And this is a quote from that press release. And it says, as the chair of the Public Safety Committee and an active member of many public safety organizations, I have a deep respect for police officers and first responders in our community, said County Legislator Carla Boyce. In light of recent events, I hope this local law will ease the minds of our local law enforcement and first responders and curtail the likelihood of more egregious incidents. Sounds okay so far. And then the second part, I'm proud to sponsor a local law that looks after those who look after us. It's difficult to adequately thank them for the job that they do. However, as a county, we can ensure that they are being treated fairly and take appropriate precautions to prevent them from being harassed or threatened, said County Legislator Kara C. Halstead. The local law aims to crack down on behaviors of disrespect and incivility towards law enforcement and first responders in the hopes that these similar incidents do not escalate. It goes on to say in September that two EMTs were attacked on 390, one was bitten. So and then it names an incident in Nassau County. And okay, now I know some of you are going to listen to what I just read, and you're going to think, well, that's a well-intentioned law, and we do need to protect our first responders. And I get what you're saying. But here's the thing. There are two big issues with this, and the first is that I don't particularly like when classes of people, particularly government employees, are given some sort of separate class of punishment from others. Some of the acts described to justify this bill are things like assault or obstruction of a government operation. And to be frank, I don't think that this bill is going to do any more to protect police officers and first responders than what we already have. And second, the language of the bill, the final bill that came out, and the intention of the bill, as kind of indicated, is that it would do things to criminalize behavior that's considered annoying. And in that statement that came out, it said a violation of this law will result in an unclassified misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in jail and/or a fine of up to $5,000. And again, this is to crack down on behaviors of disrespect and incivility. That's a quote from County Legislator Kara Halstead. Disrespect and incivility, it seems to me, are protected by free speech. I can't understand how the Republican majority in the Monroe County Legislature can look at this law and think, oh, being disrespectful to a police officer should be criminal, should be sending someone to jail, should be possibly ruining their life with a $5,000 fine. Now, I get, again, something that is assault. When you're doing something like, they had this thing in New York where, or maybe it was New York or Philly, where they dumped water on a police officer's head. Okay, yeah, I get that. I get that maybe should constitute some sort of criminal penalty. But, man, $5,000 and up to a year in jail for disrespectful, and I think the actual law says annoying a first responder or a police officer. Now, what type of behavior constitutes annoying? Is behavior like, I don't know, filming a police officer considered annoying? Is behavior like, hey, officer, this person wasn't doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be arresting? Is that considered annoying? Or is it standing up for someone's rights? Is it exercising your right to free speech to intervene in what could be an unlawful arrest? And there's all sorts of issues with this. And what bugs the heck out of me is first of all, for those of you who know me, I am the chair of the Monroe County Libertarian Party, and I take our candidate endorsements very seriously. And in this particular case, many members of the Republican majority who received the Libertarian Party endorsement ended up voting for this bill. And that's incredibly disappointing to me. I'm incredibly disappointed in people like the President, Dr. Joe Carbone, who supported this bill. And I don't have the final roll call yet, but it looks like it was just a party line vote where Republicans voted for it and Democrats didn't. So I can be pretty safe in assuming who voted for what in this case. So yeah, that's incredibly disappointing. I don't think that criminalizing behavior that's considered annoying by police officers in any way reflects libertarian values, and these candidates all pledged to support libertarian values. And when we had vetted them, that's, again, what they had pledged and promised to do. And they are, within days of getting elected, failing on their promises. And for that, I'm incredibly disappointed in the county legislature candidates that we endorsed who supported this bill. And, and I'm sorry to people that that looked at our endorsement and would assume that this type of vote wouldn't happen. So that's, yeah, I'm sorry about that, y'all. But going back to, again, the content of the bill is, I imagine this is something that is going to immediately get shot down in court as soon as someone ends up getting prosecuted for it. I don't think there's going to be any prevention of any serious incidents. Seriously, if someone's going to hurt a police officer, a bill criminalizing annoying them is not going to prevent them. There's lots of other reasons why violence against police happens. This ain't going to change any of that. And I'm frustrated that this happened. But here's what I want to talk about related to that, is that this bill strikes me as virtue signaling. Now, if you listen to right-wing radio and right-wing podcasts, you'll hear virtue signaling brought up all the time in relation to what people on the left are doing. And that's where I hear it far more often. But in this case, what the virtue signaling is for is it's a bill, it's an action of government that is used to make people, usually in a friendly party, look like you're taking action on something, right? And one of the biggest challenges of our current political moment is that politicians feel the need to look like they are taking action constantly. They feel the need to look like they are saving the day, because if there is a perceived problem out in the public, even if that problem is going to solve itself or should be solved with just social change or cultural change, politicians cannot help themselves. And in fact, they might not be wrong that voters expect them to do something about it. But again, here's what happens is that these bills get put out. The intention of the bill is to make it look like they are doing something about a perceived problem in the community. In this case, the perceived problem is that police officers or other first responders are being harassed. And again, they cite those couple of incidents in the press release. And now they've done something to, in their minds, put both voters and first responders at ease. But here's the thing. A lot of times these politicians don't think about what the long-term consequences are of a law like this. A law like this is going to mean that someone who maybe they're recording the police, maybe they're just making jokes, maybe they are being annoying, but they're not doing anything to actually obstruct the operation of whatever a police officer is doing. They're going to get very hurt by this. They're going to get arrested. They may end up spending a year in jail. They're going to face up to $5,000 in fines. It is going to hurt them. It is going to potentially ruin their life for something that, again, is elevating police officers and first responders above the level of civilians. And I know people are going to listen to this and they're going to be talking back to their radio when they hear that type of thing. Oh, but Kevin, they have an important job to do. I know they have an important job to do. And I'm not saying it's good behavior to bother any police officers or emergency responders. But the threshold for sending someone to jail needs to be incredibly high, because it's not something to be taken lightly. It's an incredibly serious thing to kidnap someone and throw them in a cage. And let me be clear, that's what putting someone in jail is. It's not a nice thing. It's not a pretty thing. Let's be blunt about what putting someone in jail is. It is kidnapping someone and putting them in a cage. And sometimes we want to do that. When we need to keep dangerous people out of society, that makes sense. Jail is a solution that can keep dangerous people away from people who just want to live their lives. But if the type of people you're throwing in jail are just being annoying, then we have a problem. And it's laws like this that I think that drive me nuts. That drive me as a libertarian nuts. And I know it's just a small thing, but there are so many things like this that pile up and pile up. And you can read this Twitter account that I love. It's called Crime a Day, and it just covers federal crimes. And they literally just tweet out one crime every single day. You know, they will not get done in my lifetime, in your lifetime. There are so many laws in the books that Americans probably break a law every single day. And many of those laws include serious criminal penalties like jail. If we want a truly free society, we need to look at laws like this, even something that seems small and petty, and maybe there's a good reason behind it, but we need to think seriously, do we really need someone to go to jail for that? Do we really need someone to lose their liberty over that? Is it that serious? Is there a better way that we can handle this without a ham-fisted government solution? Sorry, but that's what I feel like this is. I really don't like what the Republican majority in the Monroe County Legislature did. and be on the lookout because there are other laws like this. Nassau County passed a similar law. There may be a law like this coming up in your town as well. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few minutes here on Radio Free New York. And again, I'm Kevin Wilson, subbing in for Andrew Hollister today. We'll be back in a few. Welcome back to Radio Free New York here on WYSL. I'm Kevin Wilson, subbing in for Andrew Hollister today on Radio Free New York. And if you're just joining us, this is a pre-recorded episode, so you can't call in if you're listening to us on the radio. But if you are listening to us online, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, please leave me a comment. I would love to respond to you later on when this show actually airs. And if you want to contact me directly, you can always contact me on Twitter at KevinWilsonROC or on Facebook, facebook.com/KevinWilsonROC, and you'll see my name under there, Kevin Wilson Libertarian, and I'd love to talk to you and discuss the first responders bill that's happening in Monroe County and similar bills that are happening in other counties across New York State, and I suspect in other places across the country as well. But jumping off of what's going on in Monroe County, there's been another, this week, controversy with Monroe County. And what happened is that the Monroe County Legislature decided to do a few things to limit the power of a new incoming county executive. And for those of you not familiar with the political situation up here, Monroe County, one of the big counties in this region of New York, Cheryl D'Onofrio, who was a Republican, lost her election to a Democrat, Adam Bello, and that was last week as of this recording. And this week, the Republican majority in the county legislature proposed a new bill called the Checks and Balances for Legislative Equality Act, also called the Cable Act. Gotta love those acronyms in bills. And what it does is it limits a few of the powers of the county executive. It does things like adds a few more appointments that the county executive makes have to be approved by the county legislature, including things like the deputy county executive and the county attorney, things that the incumbent Cheryl D'Onofrio did not have to deal with when she was in. It also adds some limits to it lowers the threshold for contracts that need to be approved by the county legislature. Currently, everything above 5,000 or everything above 20,000 has to be approved by the county legislature, but that threshold is going to get lowered to $5,000. So now every contract going through the Monroe County Executive Office above 5,000 needs to be looked at by the county legislature. And even after this election, you should know that the Republicans maintain a very slim 15-14 majority in the Monroe County Legislature. Now, this isn't the only time that this has happened where a party loses an executive branch and suddenly they enact reforms to curtail the executive branch. And now part of me is like, all right, well, great. Yeah, no, some of these reforms are pretty good, actually. I agree with some of the restrictions that they put on the county executive and requiring greater approval and greater oversight, and that's great. However, there's a big but. This looks like it was done in bad faith. It's, I don't necessarily object to the substance of what they're doing, but when you do something like this, just as you lose an election for county executive, it looks like you're just doing this to kneecap the person coming in after you. And I think people asked the president of the county ledge, Joe Carbone, and the majority leader, Brian Marionetti, in a press conference yesterday, would you have done this if Cheryl D'Onofrio won the election? And they kind of gave a waffling answer about how they were still looking at these reforms, and these are reforms that Democrats wanted to do, but it's a really tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. And again, this isn't something that's new. This is a strategy that other legislatures have used around the country. It happened in Wisconsin as well. As soon as the governor of Wisconsin switched parties from Republican to Democrat, the Republican-controlled legislature suddenly got in their heads that they should reform the power of the executive and take away that power and bring it back to the legislative branch where conveniently they're still in the majority. And this will happen every few years at the national level as well. We'll hear about, if you remember, Republicans just a few years ago were going on and on about how we need to reduce the power of the executive branch at the federal level, that the president had too much power, that the president had an enormous amount of authority to do things like conduct wars, to essentially start new spending, to legislate essentially from the executive branch in the executive branch's ability to create new laws and regulations through the massive federal bureaucracy. And the Republicans were on point with those criticisms. The Obama administration was uniquely terrible at abusing executive authority. And then Donald Trump gets elected. Suddenly, everyone switches, right? So suddenly now the Democrats are the ones who are concerned with executive authority. Suddenly they're the ones who want to limit the power of the executive now that the other person is in office. Now, they couldn't do that immediately after the 2016 election because they had neither control of the House nor control of the Senate, so they weren't really in a position to legislate in this manner in the way that the Monroe County Legislature was. And one of the things that frustrates me about this whole thing is one, it's the rank hypocrisy of it all. I mean, I don't, guys who are loyal to the Republican and Democratic Party, all you folks out there, you've got to see the hypocrisy, right? Seriously, like you spend 4 to 8 years talking about how much we need to limit a president's authority or a county executive's authority or a governor's authority, and then suddenly when your guy's in power, when your person's in power, you don't care anymore. Or if you weren't concerned about it for 4 to 8 years and suddenly your person's no longer in power and, oh gosh, we got to do all these reforms, it's a terrible look. People don't think you're genuine when you do it. And what kills me about this is that I think a lot of these reforms are necessary. I think that we absolutely need to limit the authority of the president. I think President Trump has far too much power. I think President Obama had far too much power. I think Governor Cuomo has far too much power. I think the county executive should at very least have a lot of oversight. Now, we can quibble about the individual pieces of the Cable Act in Monroe County specifically, and what shouldn't or shouldn't be approved and what threshold should constitute approval by the county ledge for contracts. But I think the larger point is that we do need to have a serious conversation about executive authority, about all branches of government, from the mayor's office all the way up to the president of the United States. And I would say that specifically, I live in the city of Rochester, and I'd say specifically the mayor often has too much power, that the mayor is able to exert a lot of influence without being checked in a way that I think would make more sense to go through the city council. Not always a popular opinion, and it's a one-party city anyway, so it's a much different type of discussion. But I think the larger point is that, like, again, when we're having these types of discussions, we need to approach them in good faith. That if we're trying to examine what is the best system of governance, we need to look objectively and not just look at, is an ally in power or is an enemy in power. We need to look and say, if my enemy's in power, does this make sense? If my ally's in power, can they get what they need done, accomplished, right? And I think that it's fundamentally unhealthy for a democratic republic to be inconsistent in those values, to shift those values depending on who's in office. Kind of my general rule of thumb when it comes to these things is, would you want your worst enemy to have unchecked power? And I say this most loudly to any of you Democrats listening out there. Did you want the same powers that you were totally fine with Obama having? Powers like being able to unilaterally drone strike an American citizen without consequence. Do you want that same power in the hands of President Trump? And the Democrats, gotta love them, they are still proposing new powers for the presidency in the hopes that they're going to be the ones who capture it. People like Elizabeth Warren are proposing giving greater authority to the government and specifically to the executive branch, the authority to be able to regulate social media companies. And I can't help but wonder, why on earth would Elizabeth Warren, who understands that Donald Trump is a dangerous man, why would she potentially want to give him the ability to oversee what a massive social media company like Facebook does and have him have a say in what is and isn't truthful and what kind of speech is allowed online? That's a fundamentally dangerous proposition to me. I wouldn't want either Donald Trump or Elizabeth Warren in control of those things. I think it's much more important that people just think critically and figure out truth for themselves in the best way possible. And that's what I think we expect of our citizens in the Democratic Republic. But again, going back to the Monroe County thing, Monroe County legislators, I can't imagine you're listening to this, but if you are, again, it's not a good look. It looks like it's in bad faith. If you had done this 3 months ago, it might have looked like it was done in good faith. I understand that there'd be political consequences to that, but at least it would have looked like, hey, these are reforms that are needed. We, as a legislature, should really be looking more closely at what the county executive does. We should expect more transparency out of a county executive, which is what the Republican majority is saying is the impetus for this law, and we should. And that's why this set of laws should be passed. But it doesn't look like that to most people. It looks like a scandal. It looks like you're trying to, in the minds of Democrats, overturn the results of the election. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it does look like it's in bad faith. And now you got Adam Bello, the newly elected county executive, who's no longer going to come to the table for this. And I can't blame him. Why would he want to participate in discussions like this at this point when it appears to him that people aren't acting in a way where they want to have an honest discussion about the powers of the executive? They're just trying to kneecap him as he's coming into office. Because, again, it's a big deal that a Democrat won in Monroe County. A Democrat hasn't won in like 30 years up there. So this is a huge deal, and now you have this new law in place. And again, I wish I could respect the good. I wish there was good intentions behind it, because I would want to get behind a lot of the things in this bill. But no, it's a bad look. It's a bad PR move, and I'm frustrated with it. But all right, I think I'm gonna wrap up and take another break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about the Libertarian Party presidential debate. So much news time is spent on covering the Democratic primary. Let's spend a couple minutes checking in with the Libertarians to cover their primary. Again, thanks for listening to Radio Free New York here at WYSL. I will be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Radio Free New York here on WYSL. I'm Kevin Wilson, subbing in for Andrew Hollister today. Thanks again for listening to Radio Free New York, and make sure that if you're listening to us online, that you subscribe on Andrew Hollister's YouTube channel, on the Facebook page. Make sure you like the page and follow him on Twitter so you can see and hear these broadcasts in the future. Your support is very important to us, and we really appreciate it. And again, I'm Kevin Wilson, subbing in for Andrew Hollister. I have my contact info up on the page. This isn't a live broadcast, but I would love to respond to any feedback after the fact on the various social media channels. So we were talking about some executive issues. So speaking of executives, the mainstream media, when they're not covering the impeachment trials, is breathlessly covering the Democratic Party primary. But there is another primary happening here in the U.S. It is in the Libertarian Party. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk about what's going on there, because there was a debate this last weekend, a debate that you can see streamed in its entirety on the Andrew Hollister YouTube channel. I was down there. I was working one of the cameras, so I got to see the whole thing live, and it was something. So there were, 1, 3, 6, 8 candidates on stage total. There was Jedi Hill, Daniel Kreisman, Arvin Vora, Daniel Taxation is Theft Berman, and yes, his legal name is Taxation is Theft. That is legally his middle name. He changed it. He declared it. He explains everything that's going on in there. Sam Robb was also on stage, Ken Armstrong, and Max Abramson, and then the infamous Vermin Supreme. So I'll talk about... all right, I'm trying to figure out where to start here, but I think I'll talk about just kind of the nature of the debate. So they asked the candidates various questions. The moderator asked them. They got to ask each other questions. They got to see questions from the audience. It was fine. There's a few points in debate. If you listen to it, I wish they had taken the question-asking portion a little bit more seriously. But I do want to comment on a few of the candidates that I thought were interesting, that stood out. And the one I want to start with is Vermin Supreme. So if you don't know Vermin Supreme, he's the guy who walks around with a boot on his head. He's that guy. And I got to tell you, he may be one of my favorite presidential candidates. And I'm not joking either. I really enjoy Vermin Supreme. I think he's an incredible candidate. I think he's very interesting. He is not merely a lunatic. So you get on stage, you see him on stage, and you see him when he's doing his thing, and he's wearing a boot on his head. He's wearing all these ties, and he'll go up and he'll give this speech about how America's facing a great moral and oral crisis, and that the only way to solve it is with secret dental police. And he'll go on and he'll talk about the pony-powered economy and all these things, and it's just a wild platform proposal that's, to me, it's just a riot. And, you see him the first couple times, and he's a laugh, but as you start to see him more, and you'll see this in the debate, he broke character during the debate, and he said, listen, the boot comes off, I can explain to you things that are going on, and he kind of explained that, hey man, it's kind of a gimmick. It gets people talking about him. It gets people showing up and seeing what the heck it's all about. All of his policies are satire, where he talks about the moral crisis of dental hygiene. He's making references to, the war on drugs and the war on terror. When he's talking about ponynomics, where he's going to give everyone a pony, he's kind of riffing on the justifications for strange distributive economic policies. But during the debate, when he didn't have an answer related to one of his policies that are in character, he would just do things like read off the party platform or answer it straight, and it was interesting to hear. I'll tell you, for those of you who aren't in the know, there's a certain philosophy behind some libertarians who don't think that the LP can win the presidency. It's a minority faction of folks, and so their solution is satire. Their solution is people like Vermin Supreme, who choose to attack the idea of the imperial presidency, who choose to undermine culturally our respect for politicians. When Vermin Supreme gives this other part of his speech where he talks about how he's going to lie to you and how he's going to say whatever he needs to say in order for you to trust him enough to give him power. It's not hard to wonder if a politician that we've elected has ever thought that. So his whole shtick is that he's going to mock politicians. He's going to try to give the absurdist version of policies that using the same logic that many politicians use to justify things like the war on terror, the war on drugs, and economic policies. And in that, try to undermine it. Now, I've spent a good amount of time talking about Vermin. I like Vermin. I don't know that that's a strategy that I agree with. I love listening to the guy. I don't know that that's the right thing for me. So I'll step away from him. He's the awesome sideshow for the Libertarian nomination for president, but it gets brought up every single time we mention the Libertarian Party debate. Why do you put that guy on stage? That's why. We know it's an act. We know it's a joke. He knows it's a joke. The party knows it's a joke, and it's a bit, and we recognize that it's a bit. So I'll get that out of the way. I know that if I talked about this and people outside the party could call in, y'all might be asking about that guy, and I'm sure you're wondering what I thought. And I'm sure Andrew probably has somewhat of a similar opinion, even if he's not going to share it on here, that Vermin Supreme may be smarter than he seems at first. He has a strategy. It might not be a strategy that I agree with, but there's something to it. So moving on to some of the other stuff, there's a couple interesting candidates on the stage. I'm not gonna spend much time on Jedi. Seemed like he was trying to sell his book. Max Abramson, interesting. He is a elected state legislator currently in New Hampshire. I think he's kind of a middle road guy. He's fairly moderate for a libertarian, I think. Daniel Kreisman. You know what? Yikes. You can watch the debate. You can see what that is. Also, Arvin, yikes. Well, okay. So I'll say this about Arvin. Arvin is a guy who aesthetically knows what he's doing. He knows how to wear a suit. He knows how to talk well. He knows how to make his points. His opinions on stuff are a bit radical. He wants to do things like shut down schools. He has a pretty bad opinion on a few moral issues. I'll put it that way. It's the reason why Larry Sharp, the candidate for governor last year, actually resigned from the Libertarian National Committee. He was over Arvin Vohra. I know he has pretty strong feelings about the guy. He's polished, but not my cup of tea. I'll put it that way. Dan Berman I thought was fine. I thought it was interesting. He explained the hat thing. So in addition to his name being Daniel Taxation is Theft Berman, he also wears a big yellow hat. It's another gimmick. It's just a way to catch people's attention. It's like what Trump does with the MAGA hats. It's what Andrew Yang does with the math hats. This is his version of that. So he wears a big hat, yellow hat, says taxation is theft on it. It's to catch people's attention. But I thought as a candidate, he did fine. He had solid answers on a lot of things. Same with Sam Robb. He was mostly fine. He talked about. I didn't particularly like his answer on borders. So he gave this answer on borders where he thinks that we should have essentially closed borders but open doors, and that should be hard to get in, but we should let a lot of people in, and that I know I'm not necessarily going to get a lot of agreement. I don't know if I'm going to get a lot of agreement with this audience, but I'm definitely more of an open borders guy, and fight me in the comments about that. We could use the engagement. Happy to argue with you about that. And the other thing that Sam Robb said that a lot of people didn't like is there's a question asked about funding for roads, and essentially the question was about how would you get toll roads taken away, and he gave this answer that was something like, well, I wouldn't. Toll roads are a better way to pay for things because the users are the ones paying for them instead of taxpayers sharing the burden regardless of whether or not they use that. And that's a bold opinion of him to have within the Libertarian Party, but I tell you what, I agree with him. I appreciate that he said that, because guess what? Like something like the New York State Thruway, I think that it totally makes sense to have tolls on. You have a limited access highway. It's easy to charge people. You just get charged when you use it, and it doesn't make more sense to fund it just through the general fund or fund it through the gas tax or something like that. for the most part, I'm of the inclination that if you're going to use a service, you should pay for it. So if you're going to use the thruway, then okay, let's try to collect tolls to be able to cover all of the maintenance and the construction that go on the thruway. And same thing with public transit. I don't have a problem necessarily with public transit. I just want it to be paid for as effectively as possible. So all these things, I get frustrated with libertarians and conservatives who are just like, oh, that's like a tax, so we shouldn't have to pay it. And I'm like, well, someone got to pay for this thing. And if it were owned by a private company, well, guess what? They would probably just be using tolls instead of taxes that you have even less of a choice in. If you don't like the tolls, you could just not drive on the thruway. That's it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Tolls, fine. Taxes, terrible. Not theft, but extortion. So tolls are slightly better than that. All right, so one last candidate, and he might be my favorite candidate of the night. And I want to play a small clip of what he does because I think the most distinguishing part about this gentleman is his voice, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as you listen to him. I'm going to play a quick audio clip from the debate from Ken Armstrong. He was being asked a question about promoting peace between nations or something like that from Jedi. So I'll play a quick clip from him right now.
I really love Jefferson's inaugural address. In his inaugural address, he said that we should strive to be at peace with all nations, at commerce with all nations, and be good friends with all nations. And that's not a link arms and sing kumbaya kind of thing. That takes hard work.
All right, yeah, that's Ken Armstrong, and he has a really interesting background. He gave interesting answers on immigration because he lives in Mexico for a lot of the year. But his voice sounds like the real life version of someone who's talking through a voice modulator. That's not just a sound quality of the debate. That's how that guy actually sounds. And again, for his part, I think he's one of the candidates who is taking things as seriously as possible. He's still trying to build his movement and build his followers and build credibility. There's always a few people in the party who try to take things very seriously and approach this from a policy perspective of would we actually want this person to be the vice president or the president, and there are other people who take the vermin supreme strategy and just try to make a cultural impact more than anything else. And but Ken Armstrong, I think, would be a pretty strong candidate for president or vice president. He seemed knowledgeable upon first impression. I'll have to dig into him a bit more, but the debate is interesting. Again, it's on Andrew's page. Check it out. I know I was frustrated with some of the questions and some of the way that the debate went. But if you look for some of the nuggets of good people, I'm hoping that within a few months, the debate itself will start to narrow. We'll start to see the serious candidates, the candidates who have a backing and have strategy behind them, start to kind of rise to the top, and we get a bit more of a substantive debate as time goes on. And there were other candidates who weren't able to make it either. People like Kim Ruff or Adam Kokesh, I know quite a few others. But this was, again, an interesting, lively debate happening in Olean, New York last weekend. And because Andrew recorded it and I helped record it, I did want to comment on it since I have this platform here. But, all right, so I think that about wraps everything up. Thanks again for listening to Radio Free New York. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you want to follow me, I can be found at Kevin Wilson, ROC on Twitter, and also Facebook.com/Kevin Wilson ROC. You'll find me under Kevin Wilson Libertarian. Make sure you check out and subscribe to Andrew's YouTube channel. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, on Facebook, and of course, keep listening here every week on WYSL 1040 AM and 92.1 to 95.5 FM. We are here every Monday and Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Thanks again for listening to Radio for New York. Andrew will be back on Monday. He will talk to you again then, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks.